It's 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the UC Women in Technology Fall Fireside Chat. My name is Charron Andrus. I am the current chair for the UC Women in Tech committee, and I'm the associate CISO at UC Berkeley. Today, our fireside chat guest is Rachael Nava. Rachael is the COO for the University of California system, and we are very excited to have Rachael with us today to talk through all things tech and career and UC. Welcome, Rachael.
Thank you, Charron. I'm thrilled to be here.
We're so happy to have you, definitely. And so we have a few questions that we're going to walk through with Rachael, and then we will be saving some time for Q&A. So feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A, and we will get to those in a moment. But we're going to start off with just asking you to share your journey to becoming the Executive Vice President and COO of UC.
Great. Well, thank you. And nice to see everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Like most people, my journey's not linear. And it's one of the things I often tell people when they're thinking about like their career trajectory. Often when you get to a destination, you look back and you realize it's a zigzag as opposed to a straight line. But each of those points along the zigzag are the things that helped you build the foundation to be ready for your opportunity. So I think you don't know that when you're starting your career off, but when you're in a spot like I am now, you can look back and have that perspective, which is really great. So I've been in my role as the Executive Vice President and COO of UC for 10 years almost. It'll be 10 years in February. Hard to believe that it's been that long. It feels like a blink, frankly. Before that, I spent most of my career working in healthcare, and I started off working in community clinics and learned how to be a leader through that process. And then had the opportunity to start a health plan for undocumented children, and there got relationships in kind of the managed care health plan space, and ultimately ended up being a chief operating officer for a Medicaid health plan. And I did that for about a decade, and had the opportunity to consider coming to the University of California. And shockingly enough, people often don't believe the story, but I applied for this job to be COO of UC via LinkedIn. I saw the job announcement on LinkedIn one night. I was sitting in my bed scrolling on my phone, and it popped up, COO of the University of California. I'm an alumna of UC Santa Cruz, love this institution, and it's really gotten me where I am today as a person. And I called my dad, which is what you do when you're thinking about big life decisions, and said, what do you think? And he went to Cal and was like, go for it. And so lo and behold, I put my application in, didn't think anything of it. And then like the next day, the recruiter called me and said, hey, we want to talk to you. And here I am. So, you just never know where, if you don't take a risk and put yourself out there, you just never know where you might land. So here I am.
That's so wonderful. And it does speak to, kind of this idea that we have to tell ourselves yes, like put our names out there, don't tell ourselves no, at least get your name in the conversation. So thank you for sharing that.
And if I could just say something about that, I think as women leaders in particular, and women in our career in general, we look at a job description and we don't feel like we can apply unless we can check every single box off of the experience needed and the qualifications needed. And we often count ourselves out of opportunities because we don't think we have enough. And in reality, we do. And so you have to just throw yourself out there and recognize that you have so much context for the work. And you may not have the content experience, but I bet you have the context and the technical skills to do the work. So yeah, don't hold yourself back. Because even if you don't get the position, you learn so much about yourself along the way. So I always tell people, go for it.
That's great advice, definitely. And speaking of technical skills, so the technology function for the University of California falls underneath your purview. And I think we'd love to hear your thoughts about, how you feel we should best support and engage women in technology across the UC system.
Well, I would love to. And, one of the funny things as I was thinking about this chat today is I never really identified myself as a woman in technology. So I have to own that. And I'm disappointed in myself that I hadn't, because I really have worked in IT pretty much all of my career in some form or fashion, whether it was, underneath a desk plugging in network cables for at a clinic because nobody else knew how to do it, or all the way up to, leading large teams in an enterprise application reboot, which hundreds of millions of dollars worth of technology and business process underway. So I should identify as a woman in technology, and I'm proud to. So I want to say that first. And then in terms of supporting women in tech, I'll say this, and I think it applies to everyone, not just women, but particularly for women for today's conversation, is lead from where you are. We all have an opportunity in our roles to be leaders, regardless of your position in the organization or your title or status. And when you take the opportunity and you step into a role and you lead, whatever is within your purview, one, people notice. Two, people call you up and say, hey, I have this problem I need to solve. You're good at solving problems. Can you help me? You start to build your network. You start to build your brand, and it creates opportunities for you down the line. The other thing that I think it's really important for women to own in their own leadership is you have to be uniquely you. Right? It's easy to feel like you have to conform to what you think, what societal norms are around what does it mean to be a woman leader? What does it mean to be a leader in technology? And I always tell people, one, look at traits that you admire in other leaders. It's always good to study leaders that you admire, but you don't have to become them. Figure out, try stuff on, see what fits for you. And amplify the things that work for you. But ultimately, if you're not authentically yourself, then you're not going to be your best self. So be uniquely you, and that will get you places. And then I think lastly, I just want to say, as women leaders, we need to share our stories because there's so much to glean from other people's stories about how they got to where they are. We need to support women leaders. We're in this together. We need to support each other and we need to lift each other up. And one of my greatest honors is that I get to mentor a lot of women in our organization. And it's one of my most favorite things I get to do because it's really about mirroring back to people what they already know in themselves, but aren't in a place to be able to see. And so if I can help other women be successful and, chart their course, then I'm successful.
Yeah, and that's, definitely the theme of Women in Tech. The system-wide committee is really spotlighting, lifting up all of the work that's going on the local campuses with their Women in Tech groups, is really saying, you're doing the work, you've been doing the work. How do we make sure that people see you, see your group's work, get recognized for it? I was talking to someone about how we don't often see ourselves like listed for awards or things. And I'm like, well, we have to be the ones that put our names forward. And that's what we can do as a community as we start to hear of what someone's doing really great on a campus, and then say, oh, let's, put their name in for that UC Tech Award or whatever it might be, so that we really do bring attention to all of the work that we're already doing across the system. And then I loved what you said about like thinking of yourself as a woman in tech. We want to think expansively about what it means to be a woman in tech. There's so many functions that might not be a coder or like a traditional technologist, but we've got communication specialists, we've got project managers, program managers, all of the things that go into running a technology organization. And we want those women to also feel like they're a part of Women in Tech if they so choose to engage with us. So I'm glad you said you're a woman in tech.
Yes, we got to build our community because I agree with you 100%. One, technology is so expansive and it's the infrastructure and the engine that drives this institution. Without technology, we wouldn't be able to do this conversation virtually. We wouldn't be able to answer our emails. We wouldn't be able to do, this high performance computing needed to support our faculty and researchers. It's so expansive. And so, yeah, we are touching so many people in the work that we do, whether or not you have a traditional technology job or not. And so, yeah, join the community, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Join us, come. So here's a question for you to kind of just imagine yourself. If you were starting out today, early mid-career role in IT, somewhere in the UC, what would you do, knowing what you know now, to grow and advance your career?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most important things, especially if you're early in your career, is to think about what does it mean to be a partner to the business, right? Because that's so much about what IT is about, is, we bring forward technology solutions to solve business problems. And in order to really be of value to an organization, we need to be good partners. We need to understand the business challenges. We need to be there to help solution the ideas early on. And then we're ultimately there to innovate and problem solve. And then, of course, after that point, and you've got all your business requirements, what application you're going to use, then you can do the work of, implementing. But that's, I think, almost the easy part. The hard part is actually getting yourself a seat at the table with the business leaders as they're making decisions. And if you can find a way in to those conversations and show yourself as a problem solver, somebody who's there to think strategically, that will get you places for sure. And one of the ways to do that, if you're trying to think about, like, how do I get in that room where they're talking about these things? There's often a call for, like, hey, I need help. Raise your hand and say, I'll help, even if it's maybe something tangential to the actual core part of your job, but to give you an opportunity to hear the conversations, to participate in those conversations, and then to network and show that you are capable of being a key contributor on a project. And then the next time another project rolls around, people remember you and say, gosh, Charron was really great. I want her on the team. Let's call her up. Let's bring her in. And, that's how you start to build your own personal brand and the type of value you can add to an organization. And that often then opens doors to other opportunities. So I really think, raise your hand, be willing to just kind of sit at the table, even if it's doing something that is not what you would normally traditionally do. I think it does create opportunities. I would also say to folks, find your voice, right? Own your power. And that's particularly hard early in your career because it's tricky to know when to kind of step in to a conversation, especially if you are of lower seniority around the table. But be brave and put your opinions out there. And hopefully our organization is structured culturally in a way that is inclusive and allows for the vibrancy of those voices and opinions, because that only makes our decision-making stronger when we're hearing all those perspectives. So be brave, put yourself out there, take a risk, and it'll pay off. You'll learn something from it, whether they roll with your idea or not. At least you get the experience of what was it like to be vulnerable and put yourself out there. And then last but not least, I would say, really leverage your network to the extent that you can. If you meet people that you are interested in, you admire, you're curious about their jobs, grab them in the elevator, have a 5-minute conversation, ask if you can go to coffee. Just say, I'm really curious about how you got in your position. Just learn and create those relationships, because you can leverage them later. And the more people you know, the more time you invest in those relationships, I think the better outcomes you get.
Absolutely. I love that idea about, just volunteering yourself to be in there. What I found is that even if it's not tangential to what you do, or you think it's not, sometimes you'll hear things or you'll be exposed to things that later on in your career or later on in a different project come in handy. It's like, oh, I was in that meeting. I remember hearing this thing or meeting this person. And now I have that information that can help me where I'm at now as well. So it's like none of those meetings or those experiences, I think, are ever like a waste of time if you are very thoughtful about what you're putting your hand up for. I think it is all very helpful.
You
Definitely.
know, and related to that, in addition to having those experiences where you do things kind of outside your norm, it's also really important that we continue to focus on our own professional development, whether it's, taking a class, sitting in on a seminar, listening to, talking to people outside your organization to learn how they do it, really paying attention to what the industry trends are and how your jobs may need to evolve in order to make yourself competitive for something, in the future. I was thinking about UC Berkeley recently, your home campus, and, they really made a decision a while ago, before it was really a big thing, like we need to invest in data science and we need a data science degree for our students because we know that's where the industry is going. And I think they were one of the first to really do that. And so, you have to think about that for yourself too. Look across the industry, think about where you want to go and make sure that you are prepared from a technical training perspective to kind of be positioned for opportunities when they present themselves. And I think we're all trying to figure that out for AI, right? I need to spend more time on Chat GPT and I'm learning how to do that, but I'm kind of a Luddite and that was, and so the more time we can spend learning in new tools, new technology, new project management modalities, I think that's all going to benefit us and will benefit people who are early in their career.
Yeah, and I will just throw in there and don't neglect your leadership skills, your management. I think sometimes in tech, we get so focused on kind of those hard skills that we forget about some of, I hate the word soft, but those other skill sets that we need that are also important to making sure that we're ready for those roles when they open up and that we're successful in our career. So those communication skills, those leadership skills, those people management skills. Finance, budget, all of those things that we need to run successful tech organizations are important.
Yeah, and we have great resources available at the University of
Yes.
California to help people, build that set of tools in their toolbox. And so, yeah, I mean, the LinkedIn Learning, the LMS, there's a lot of opportunities to just dabble a little bit as you're thinking about advancing in your career. But you're 100% right. Once you get into a management supervisory level role, people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. And so you have to sometimes make a pivot when you become a supervisor and you have to leave behind the kind of subject matter expert function that you might have been really good at for a long time. And then you get a leadership opportunity and all of a sudden you're not in those spreadsheets, you're not doing the coding, you're not doing the programming, all of a sudden you're managing. And so it's incumbent upon us to actually be the best possible leaders we can be to support our teams and their ability to be successful. So I'm so glad you said that. And I neglected to mention it, but it's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, and it is hard. I know I remember when I had to give up the tech heavy pieces because I was making that transition. It is hard when you've done that your whole career to say, okay, I'm not going to be the SME in that space. I'm going to transition and be a SME in another space, but it is good if that is
And
the
it's hard to
trajectory
give up
that
those
you're on.
skills,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're like, oh, I know how to build a database. I can do that. And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, you don't do it anymore and you can't even remember how to write a script in Excel anymore, right? Like, oh, I'm going to do that.
Thank goodness for Chat GPT.
Exactly. But that's okay because that's not what your job is anymore, right? Your focus is to to manage and lead, and that takes a different skill set. But it's helpful to have the context of understanding what it's like to do those roles so that you can better understand what your staff are challenged with.
Absolutely. So earlier you mentioned kind of like not being afraid to reach out to folks, say, hey, can I take you to coffee? I just want to know about your career and like how you've navigated your career so that I can make better decisions for mine. And so we often talk about like having mentors and sponsors and how important that is for folks as they're navigating through the UC and just careers in general. So have you had mentors or sponsors over the course of your career, and how do you feel that that's impacted your path or even your speed as you've moved up?
Yeah. Gosh, I have been so blessed to have mentors in my life, kind of at all stages of my career, and both men and women who have really helped open my eyes to, maybe why I was stuck or why I wasn't advancing, or helping me think through, challenges that I just felt like I'd hit a wall. A couple of stories just to share. Early in my career, this is when I was working at the health plan, and I was in a kind of up and coming, I was a new leader among, very established leaders. I was a very young leader. I was 35 by the time I had become chief operating officer of this health plan. And so everybody in the leadership team was older than me. So I had to combat, what is it like to be a younger leader amongst older leaders, in my career, who had both more experience and both at the plan and just in their careers in general. And one of the things that my mentor pulled me aside kind of early in the early days, I had just kind of joined the team and I was finding my footing. And he pulled me aside and he said, "Rachel, you're doing great, but there's something I need you to stop doing." And I was like, "Okay, what is it?" And he says, "You have to stop saying, 'I'm sorry.'" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, you'll say something and then you'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry." Or you'll interrupt, you want to make a point, a statement. And then before you even make your statement, you say, "I'm sorry, but I'd like to say." And he goes, "You have to stop doing that." And he said, "Do you see men saying, 'I'm sorry'?" As women, especially young women of my generation, we were taught to ask for forgiveness first before you say anything. And that was really powerful. And I didn't realize until I had no consciousness that I was doing that. But once I was aware, I realized how often I was saying it, and how I was diminishing my own authority and my own opinions by kind of using that overlay. So I had to work hard to stop doing it, but I definitely don't do it anymore. So that's the kind of the power of mentors, is they can help you see things within yourself that are holding you back and you just don't know. One other quick story, later in my career, I was trying to figure out, this is actually right before I joined the university, I was trying to figure out what's my next move. I just felt kind of stuck and I wasn't exactly sure, do I stay where I am? Do I make a move? If I make a move, what does that move look like? And I had young kids at the time. Do I take them out of school? Do I, move to somewhere else in the state in order to have more opportunity? And my mentor at the time stopped me and she said, "Rachel, I'm going to tell you this. You're like a jet engine stalled on the tarmac, not going anywhere. And your engines are running, but you're just parked." And she said, "You need to make a move." And I was like, "Oh, wow, really? I think I'm okay." And then I sat and I thought about it and I realized she's right. And then like 6 months later, I got this job. So, sometimes you just need somebody to reflect back to you where you are. And I think great mentors can help you along, critical stages in your career. So I highly encourage people to, find those folks that you who are willing to support you and that you can be vulnerable with, to really kind of get to the heart of, what you're working through.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I went through a fellowship, and one of the things we learned about was having your own personal board of directors. So
Like a
having,
kitchen cabinet, right?
yeah, exactly. And so sometimes we think about it's just this one person, and that's my mentor. But you might need flavors. You might need, that mentor
Totally.
who's going to tell you the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. Like your mentor who told you, "Hey, you're just parked here. You're wasting fuel, and you're not going anywhere." And you need that cheerleader mentor who's just like always, "You're the best, you
You
rock,
got this.
you got this." go for it. You might need some different folks to really make sure that you're getting a full picture of where you're going. And it's okay if it's not just all centered in one person.
Yeah, and that diversity of feedback is so helpful, right? Because sometimes we tend to surround ourselves with kind of our in-group, right? You think about in-group bias and all that, and you only get reflected back that perspective, and you need that alternative perspective sometimes to get through a breakthrough. So I really like the idea of a kitchen cabinet. I think that's excellent.
Definitely. I think I'm going to change the name of mine to kitchen cabinet. I have one. I've been calling them my personal board of directors, but I
I
like
like
kitchen.
that too. That's good. Yeah.
I spend a lot of time in my kitchen, catch my kitchen island specifically. Okay, we're gonna transition a little bit. So back from like when you were, mid-career and kind of the journey with your mentors and sponsors, to kind of where you are now. And you've been in your role for 10 years now at this point, and just wondering like what are some of your key observations about how your role has changed? Maybe even how the campuses, UCOP, and the regions have changed and how they interact maybe when you started versus now, and then maybe in that a little bit about how you think IT and women in IT specifically has evolved over those 10 years.
It's
It's
a
a
great
lot.
question. It is a lot. I know. I was just trying to
Pieces.
think about where to start. I think it's the thing that you can always count on at the University of California is that nothing's going to stay static. And that really speaks to the excellence of this institution, right? In order for us to be the best public research university in the world, which in my estimation we are, it requires us to constantly innovate. And so, for example, in my world, in operations, my team and I, we several years ago spent some time doing a strategic planning exercise to really think about like, what do we want to be as an organization? How do we best support the teaching and research and public service mission of the University of California? And we felt like the best way to do that was for our operational service, our structure, all the things we do to support the institution actually needs to be on par with the excellence of our teaching and research institution, which is world class. And if you ask anybody who works at UC if they think our operations are world class, or our technology is world class, or our services are world class, I think, if I'm being honest, the answer is no, right? And we are a large bureaucracy. We are an old institution. We have a lot of technology and infrastructure that's aging. And we often don't resource in a way that allows us to be as modern and nimble and as flexible as we need to be in order to support the teaching and research enterprise. So our vision and goal is for us to be on par. And that takes a lot of work. And so what I've been focused on, what my team's focused on, what I'm working with your leadership on the campuses about is how are we actually providing the highest levels of service we possibly can within the construct and challenges that we face as an institution. And I think we have to, particularly in technology, we have to figure out how to be nimble. You have to understand that there's going to be limited resources. So you can never just rely on throwing money at a problem. It requires us to really be strategic and thoughtful about how we resource and where we make investments. And then ultimately, I think the opportunity is figuring out how to get the best out of kind of local autonomy, because the locations understand their business and their business needs better than anybody, but not missing the opportunity to leverage the scale and the power of the institution as a whole. And that's where I think, if I really am thinking about what can we be doing better from a technology standpoint in the institution, that's where the opportunity lies. We have so many instances of duplication. Duplication of systems, duplication of services, and even contracts that we all hold with the same vendors, as opposed to having one unified contract as an institution, which gives us a lot more negotiating power and leverage. We all know that intellectually. So it's finding that balance around allowing the locations to do what they do best, and then really taking advantage of the power of the system and finding that sweet spot where we are then running on all cylinders to really optimize operationally. So when I think about the opportunity, that's always what I'm driving towards, is how can we be optimized and on par with the excellence of our rest of our enterprise. So that's always what I'm focused on. If you talk to my leadership team, you'll know that that's like whenever we're getting together and doing our planning and our goals, we're always talking about operational excellence. It'll be my life's work, I think.
It's funny. I feel like it's all of our life's work. Like we're all, wanting to that fine balance between, like you said, campus autonomy and leveraging the scale of the UC system. Because I think we all want to do that. It's like,
Yes.
see, how can we, like, we're the UC, like there's some power there without the intricacy and the nuances for each campus and medical campus.
And we're not homogenous, right? Like that's the beauty. And I think the secret sauce of our excellence is that each location has something different happening that is really special and important and adding huge value to the state and the nation and the world. And so we don't want to, from the Office of the President standpoint, we don't want to hamper that. So how do we amplify that while also not replicating where we don't need to across 10 different locations? And so, there's no right way to do that. I think a lot of it is about relationships and, how to leverage relationships to be thoughtful, strategic partners. And ultimately, we have to innovate. We can't stand still and let things happen to us. We have to be leading. One of the things President Drake said to me when he first joined the university, actually said it to his leadership team, was that, the University of California needs to lead, and we need to be in the front, and we need to be able to look behind our shoulder and know that everybody is behind us. But that requires commitment and dedication, and, you can't stand still. You have to drive forward. And so I always keep that in my mind. And I think that's really important in this space that we're talking about today, because there's so much opportunity for us to support the organization and create efficiencies and leverage technology and tools to do our work better. But it requires intention and thoughtfulness.
Absolutely. And I think it also makes like having a career in the UC so much more exciting, because there's so many different campuses. Again, like you said, they're all unique. They've all got something kind of different going on, and having that ability to say, hey, I'm working tech now, but maybe I'm looking at finance and I want to go live in Santa Barbara. You can go, look for jobs on the Santa Barbara campus and keep your seniority, keep your years of service, that continuity that the UC provides, but still with that flavor, that variety. If you want to try something new or dabble in something different, and having that opportunity, I think is a blessing that sometimes we forget about, being a part of such a large system.
I agree. I always tell people, go look at the job board. It's amazing how many opportunities there are across the institution. And don't limit yourself to just the roles that you feel like you have traditionally done or would be qualified for, because you actually, you could be great in all these other opportunities, but you have to just, give yourself a little bit of freedom to think beyond, and then be willing to take a risk, which is hard, right? Like that's not an easy thing to do, but it's sometimes it's worth it.
Yeah. Sell yourself. Be willing to, I always say, okay, let me go put on my used car salesman hat now. I got to sell myself now, or I got to sell something for my teams or whatever it might be. It's like, yeah.
Well, it's like what you said earlier in the conversation about putting your name forward for an award. As women, we don't know how to do that. It doesn't occur to us to do that. I think in our, or in our society, as you were told, put your head down, work hard, and then you'll be recognized. It doesn't work that way. Well, and so you do have to put yourself out there, and find opportunities to speak at conferences. There's lots of sessions where they're looking for, stories of people who've done interesting projects, put it together, a little outline, and throw it out there and see who bites. And then before you know it, you could be at a conference, talking to 50 to 100 people. If that's a skill set you want to develop, talking about your project, it's a great opportunity to hone those skills and network and, try stuff on.
Absolutely. And the university supports that as part of our professional development. So make sure you're looking at those national organizations that the UC is already a part of that then gives you membership for. So again, benefits that the university has that are free to us, and we just have to engage and take advantage of them.
And we have lots of conferences that are self-sponsored within the UC as well. So I think there's a plethora of opportunities, but it does take intention. You got to go out there and look for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of things that we sponsor, actually where I met you for the first time in person was a UC Tech Academy fireside chat. And what stuck with me was how open and honest and just really truthful you were about some of the questions that were put forward to you. And one of the questions that was asked at that fireside chat, and I'm going to ask you now, before we move into Q&A, is around the current concerns around the state's budget and fiscal picture, and how that then potentially leaves the UC with some concerns and maybe some shortfalls and budget constraints. So with those kind of concerns and people thinking about, what might be in this upcoming fiscal year, how do you think we should be thinking about investments in the technology space?
A great question. And, like any organization, the economic climate ebbs and flows, and you have years where budgets are good and you can make a lot of investments, in years where budgets are challenged, and you're looking at the couch cushion to see what pennies you can find in there, and hopefully you're not in a position of having to restructure or make hard decisions. With that said, though, I think that's just the cycle of the world we live in and the economic climate. We do know that the state is facing budget shortfalls in the next fiscal year, and that some of those shortfalls will likely flow through to the University of California. Campuses are already taking a look at what the potential challenges might be. That being said, we need to recognize first, we have a $55 billion budget as an institution. What's interesting, if you haven't studied our budget carefully, more than half of our revenue now comes from our academic health enterprise, which is very interesting. So the economics of our revenue inflows have changed over time. If you look back when I was a student in the 90s, our state support was significantly higher than it is now. We're looking at about 10% overall state support in our budget. However, that flows to the campuses differentially, depending upon what kinds of auxiliary programs they have, what are their professional programs, do they have a medical enterprise. That shifts their revenue picture differently. So every campus is situated differentially. To get to the heart of your question, though, what do we do in times of difficult economic challenge? I think it's really about really understanding in the technology space, where are risks, really understanding, how do we prioritize our risk? How do we protect our most valuable assets? And understanding the likelihood of our risk. And then out of that, making investments based on, those pieces. But we also want to make sure we're making investments to advance the institution. We need to continue to be able to innovate. And one of the ways we do that sometimes is by taking a look at the institution as a whole and saying, are there things we're doing now that if we invested in this other opportunity would free up resources that we don't need to be doing anymore? Sometimes people refer to that as zero-based budgeting. It's like not just augmenting what you already do, but really taking a holistic look at the enterprise as a whole and making sure that you're investing your resources in the highest, best value. That's a hard exercise to do, but I think it's important for us to do that so that we really are able to keep our eye on our strategic goals and the key objectives we have within our organization, while also recognizing we're going to have to be fiscally conservative and thoughtful in where we are. I would also like to say we should just be strategic about how we leverage our capital budgets, and think about depreciation. How do you leverage fund balances and, one-time monies to make investments as opposed to adding or augmenting, kind of the permanent budget, which is harder dollars to find, as we all know. And so, really taking a look at how do you leverage one-time money as well. And then lastly, I think you have to make the case, right? So if you know that there's something that your organization really should be investing in, but you're not sure, financially how to fund it, come up with the value proposition and tell the business, if we invest in this, this is what it's going to bring to you, and this is how it's going to help you. And you'll be surprised how people will be able to find money when there's something really good to go after.
Yeah, that goes back to kind of what you said about, not being afraid to use your voice to speak up. I like to tell people, even if they say no, if it is something that you truly think is valuable to the organization, bringing it forward is a good step. And there might be opportunities for conversation later. So maybe it's not this fiscal year, but maybe it's a future fiscal year that becomes available. So I think that's really great advice. I'm going to go ahead, we're at 1:40 mark, so I'm going to go ahead and transition us over to our audience Q&A. And I want to go ahead and introduce Lily, who is one of our representatives from our Office of the President, to facilitate our Q&A with Rachel. Thanks, Lily.
Thank you, Charron. Hello, Rachel. Hello, everyone. We have some great questions coming in from the audience here. I'm not sure that we will be able to give replies to all of the questions, but we will do our best. And here is question number one. How did you break the negative barriers towards the capabilities of women leaders as a woman in leadership inside and outside of University of California?
It's a great question, and not an easy one. I think to be a women leader, in some instances, it requires resilience and persistence. I think women often experience challenges. You put an idea forward and nobody picks it up. And then maybe 3 or 4 minutes later in the conversation, somebody else puts that idea out there and everybody's like, great idea. And so you do have to realize that often it takes time for you to establish yourself as a leader, to get recognized as a leader. You can't give up on that. And it's helpful to find allies and supporters who will create opportunities for you to have a voice at the table. Or to try something you might not have tried before. But I really do think own your power, find your voice, leverage allies and supporters, and you can't be afraid. And I know that's hard, and as women leaders, it's an incumbent upon us to create space and lift others up at the same time. And the more we do that, I think the more inclusive and supportive our organization will be.
Thank you, Rachel. For this response, I do believe that finding mentors is one of the steps in the right direction. Absolutely. And there is another question from the audience. I find leadership roles still want technical skills that I have moved away from. What types of roles allow you to move into more leadership, management, and less technical space? And what skill set did you lean on to move on?
That's a great question. Well, I think anytime you move into, I think there's 2 tracks. If you start kind of in a technology-based role, you can move into if you don't want to supervise people, you can move into kind of that program management, project management, leadership role where you're supervising, teams of people who are working towards a common objective. But you don't necessarily, and you're managing via influence as opposed to direct authority. The other more traditional route is you become a supervisor who leads a team, and you oversee their day-to-day activities. Sometimes in either of those roles, you're asked to also not only just be a leader over that work, but you're also asked to be an individual contributor still. And so when you don't have capacity to do both, what I often do then is to look around the table of who's working on whatever project I'm working on that I can leverage their skills. And it's really important as a successful leader to be a manager and to learn how to delegate and recognize you can't do everything. And it's often okay sometimes to say, you know what, I have, my responsibility is to make sure this function gets executed. I don't have to do the work myself. I can call up somebody in the team to do the work for me. My job's to deliver the output, to not necessarily do the output. And so, making that case for yourself, I think, is important. And particularly as women, we often get called on to be the doers. And we're good at that, and we're good at multitasking. But, if you're a leader, you don't always have to be the doer, but you have to make sure that the output gets achieved. But you don't have to do it yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for this answer. Another question that came from the audience is, as a leader, how do you juggle the pursuit of excellence with the need for wellness and balance?
That is a very hard one, especially if you happen to be a relatively intense type A person like I am, who's driven towards results and highly competitive. But that said, you can only maintain that pace for so long. So you do have to find a balance, because you have to remember that these jobs are marathons and not sprints. And it's okay to sprint periodically, but ultimately you've got to be in the condition to kind of maintain the marathon. And that does require work-life balance. So I'm a mom. I have 2 children. I have 3 dogs and a spouse that need me and consume my energy. And I also have a very demanding job. So I have over the years had to find that balance. Part of it is sometimes just saying no to social activities on the weekend. I just need time to rest and recuperate and cocoon. I'm an introvert at heart, so I do need my PJ couch time to kind of renew. And then also finding the things that bring you peace and our creative outlets, because we often don't get that much opportunity to be creative. So for me, that's cooking and baking. So every weekend I spend time in my kitchen, and that's one, how I express my love to my family, but 2, it's also how I express my creative endeavors. And then finding time to be out and active in my body, whether it's, hiking, which I do a lot of, walking with my dogs, trying to find places to, sit and meditate and, just get out of my head, but be in my body, which is hard. And that's different for everybody, but you have to make time every day to do that. Otherwise, the tidal wave will consume you. So we have to be diligent, just like we are in our work life. We get everything we need to get done in our work life, and you don't miss a beat, but you have to make sure you're scheduling time for yourself, because you can't sacrifice one for the other.
Finding balance. That is an awesome
it's easier
answer.
said than done.
What is one quality you believe is most critical for UC employees to embody in order to support the organization's mission and goals?
There's a lot of good answers to that question. What came to mind, Lily, when you asked me it was, I think we are all here in service of the mission. And we express that service in different ways, depending on, what seat you occupy in the organization. But ultimately, it's about executing on our jobs in a way that supports our mission objectives. And if you think about, I mean, for me, this is why I work at the University of California. When you think about the richness of our mission and the incredible impact the University of California has on our local communities, on the state, the nation and the world, the impact to individual students who get the opportunity and the privilege to come to the University of California, and how that can change the trajectory of their lives exponentially. That is what we are here to do. And so don't lose sight of the mission, especially when work is hard and there's conflict and the path forward is hard. I find often coming back to the mission is the thing that brings everybody to the table and ultimately begets compromise or collaboration or whatever, whatever we're all stuck in. So for me, it's being in service to the mission, and that expresses itself differently for each person.
Thank you for this answer. Don't lose sight of the mission. This is our common ground.
Exactly. That's exactly. And it's the thing that I think is enriching to the soul. Everybody who works at the University of California is incredibly capable and competent and could be working elsewhere, but I think we all choose to work here. And for me, I choose to work here because of this mission. And I think that's the same for so many of my colleagues that I encounter. And so it is that common ground that you can rely on when you need something to leverage in order to move forward.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Another question that came in, and I have to say the questions are coming one after another. We do have a time constraint, and we do have 8 more minutes. What UC organizational roles or functions do you think will be most greatly impacted by Gen AI in the near future, and how shall we prepare?
Well, that's a broad question. And how shall we prepare? So I think, like anything, AI is a tool that we can leverage to do our work. And for those of you that had the privilege of attending our recent conference on administrative AI, we had one of the speakers talk about the revolution that happened between typewriters and computers, right? And everybody wondered what would happen to the steno pool when typewriters went away. And then everybody got, redeployed to work on computers. And so I think of AI in a lot of ways as kind of that next technology jump we're going to take as an institution and as a society to enable thoughtful, creative humans to do their best work. And that may take some reskilling, retooling, and also recognizing that it's a tool that's imperfect and that we are going to need people to use their judgment and their brain power to make sure that we are leveraging the tools in ways that we get the best outputs. And so I think that AI will be an enabler in our work in lots of really positive ways, whether it's in the academic enterprise and the healthcare enterprise, certainly on the administrative operational side. But I also think it will have limitations. It's only as good as what you put in it. And as we know, it's also not infallible. And so I think to the latter part of the question of like, how do we get ready? You got to go out there and we got to learn the technology. You have to, just like, our faculty are right now teaching our students how to ask the right questions of AI. Because you can ask it anything and you can get an output, but the quality of that output is going to be dependent upon how you're leveraging the tool. So that's what I think we need to all be doing, is figuring out how do we ask the right kinds of questions to get the output we need in order to advance our objectives. And I think there's going to be an art to that. And I certainly have not perfected it myself.
Yes, prompt engineering is really a new and upcoming area. A big thank you to Rachael for your valuable insights, and to the audience for your thoughtful questions. And now I will pass it back to Charron. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lily. I did want to just quickly, we have about 5 minutes left. I do want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. Apologies if we were not able to get to your questions. We'll try to send out resources for those questions that were remaining. Mostly it was around how do you branch out? How do you get guidance around where do you go next and what are the opportunities? So we'll look for some resources. We did do the Women Building Bridges session at UC Tech that really talked about how to use career tracks for that type of evaluation of kind of like where you are and where you could go in your current career track or career tracks that are in your general area of interest. And most of the UCs, if not all, also offer career counseling for free for all of employees. So you can also take advantage of that for opportunities, especially if you're not really sure about what roles exist and what are your options and what areas you could potentially be looking at. So we'll get those out to everyone so you have what you need. And we want to thank you all for joining. I want to specifically thank Lily Janae Blunt, who is a UC WIT member from the Berkeley campus, and Kathy O'Sullivan, who is Rachel's assistant, for helping to get this fireside chat organized and allow us to have it for you all. And of course, last but not least, I just want to thank you, Rachael, for taking the time to speak with us and just letting people know who you are, what's important to you, and how you approach leadership in general. I think it's so important that we know who our leaders are so that we understand who is making decisions that could be impacting us. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure, Charron, and thank you so much for such an enlightening conversation.
Absolutely. I love it. I love you as a leader. I absolutely do. All right. Well, with that, we will close out our fall fireside chat. We did put in contact information if you want to stay connected to UC WIT. You can visit our website and our roster if you're looking for your local UC WIT chapter for your campus. They are all listed on our website, so you can connect and plug in locally. And you can connect with us on LinkedIn to stay engaged with any events and other materials that we might have available. And with that, I will say have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you.